So this week's I'm going to cover attacks on civil rights and institutions, immigration and detention, science and the environment, and press freedom. And then I'll end on something completely different. So let's get into it. So starting with attacks on civil rights and institutions. On the 3rd of June, Trump signed an executive order designed to strip job protections from a large group of senior federal workers. The director of the Office of Personnel Management was quite blunt about saying that if federal employees allow their views to interfere with carrying out the administration's directives, this order provides a mechanism to remove them efficiently at will. So, although it sounds fine, what it really is about is replacing independent civil service with people who will do what Trump wants without question. And the consequences of that are already quite visible. So 2 days later, news emerged that FBI Director Kash Patel had fired 5 FBI employees who were tied to a 2023 internal intelligence document about Catholic extremism in the US. Now, conservatives claimed it was anti-Catholic. Former federal law enforcement officials have said that actually these firings amount to a purge of independent civil servants. And again, they were warning that what this is doing is turning law enforcement into an ideologically driven arm of the presidency. Trump also told Acting Director of National Intelligence Bill Pulte to begin firing a large number of employees across the intelligence community. Now, on Pulte himself, Trump has now formally appointed him as Acting Director of National Intelligence, which gives Pulte oversight of all US intelligence agencies. But the issue is that Pulte has no known background in intelligence, military, or national security. Congressional statute says that the Director of National Intelligence should have extensive national security expertise. So what's going on? Well, Pulte does have a track record as one of the most aggressive advocates for prosecuting Democrats and others that Trump sees as enemies. Separately, Kurt Olson, who was a White House official who helped Trump try to overturn the 2020 election, has now joined the Justice Department as a senior attorney, and he's reporting to a prosecutor building a criminal case against Trump's perceived enemies. So the pattern is kind of clear. Trump wants to make it easier to fire long-serving professionals, and effectively what he's doing is installing loyalists wherever he can. Moving on, the Pentagon has cut the number of recognized religious identities for military service personnel down to just 33, of which 22 are Christian. The Pentagon has just called it an administrative exercise, but remember that back in March, Defense Secretary Hegseth claimed that the military's chaplain corps had been infected by political correctness and secular humanism. So this kind of seems like more like an attempt by Hegseth to turn the Pentagon into an explicit Christian nationalist institution. Also this week, Hegseth blocked the promotions of at least 7 Navy officers who had been selected by a board of senior Navy admirals. The decision disproportionately affected women and minority officers and really appeared to be driven by the administration's anti-diversity stance rather than any assessment of merit. Speaking of which, Hegseth also indicated last week that he wants to appeal a federal court ruling restricting his ban on transgendered troops. Finally, in the section on healthcare and homelessness, the Trump administration has issued a final rule requiring most Medicaid beneficiaries between 19 and 64 to prove that they're either working, doing community service, or participating in a work program to keep their Medicaid coverage. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that nearly 5 million people will lose access to Medicaid over the next decade because of this rule. And that includes many people who are already working but just can't meet the requirements to prove that they are. The administration has also issued a revised plan on its homelessness strategy, and what it's doing is shifting $1.2 billion away from the long-established Housing First program, which has a really strong evidence base for reducing homelessness, towards time-limited programs focused on treatment for mental illness and addiction. Housing First is not a controversial policy among housing researchers. It's been proven to work time and time again, but the Trump administration is dismantling it anyway. And then on to kind of immigration and detention, where the civil rights of immigrants and detainees are also being undermined. The Treasury Department has called on US banks to tighten surveillance and reporting of account holders not authorized to work in the US. So that follows an executive order from last month directing financial institutions to increase scrutiny of non-citizens' banking activities. What people are worried about for this is that it's effectively turning the banking system into an immigration surveillance tool. And that creates kind of a climate of fear for immigrant communities regardless of their legal status. Inside detention facilities, conditions remain really troubling. Detainees at Florida's Alligator Alcatraz Immigration Center have said that guards were denying them food and fresh water until they signed documents presented to them in English that they didn't understand. Last week also saw the 50th death in ICE detention since the start of the second Trump presidency. A 43-year-old Georgian immigrant died in a detention facility in Louisiana. ICE said he was taken into custody in February during an operation targeting commercial vehicle drivers. And then a memo from the acting ICE director has ordered the agency to stop reporting the deaths of newly released detainees to Congress. So this is rescinding a Biden-era policy that's required ICE to report and investigate any deaths occurring within 30 days of release. So we know there are bad conditions, we know people are dying in ICE, and now they're trying to reduce the amount of scrutiny that deaths related to ICE detention get. On science and the environment, it's also been a pretty bruising week. So firstly, Trump has used wartime presidential authority, the Defense Production Act, to hand $700 million to coal-fired power plants. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel, even though Trump's called it clean, beautiful coal. And the US Bureau of Land Management has also announced plans to auction almost 700,000 acres of oil and gas leases in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So that's one of the most ecologically sensitive areas in North America that's now being opened up for drilling. The administration has also agreed to strip endangered species protection from a lizard whose habitat overlaps with the largest oil-producing region in the US, which settles a lawsuit brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. So effectively, the lizard's existence was somewhat inconvenient. That has now been resolved. While that's kind of been going on, the administration has also said it is now dismantling a $368 million deep ocean observation system that's been monitoring coastal environments, marine ecosystems, and the powerful currents that affect global climate for over a decade. So what the administration has basically done this week is it's lent more heavily into fossil fuels and reduced our ability to measure the consequent damage on the climate. On reproductive health, the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, has launched a safety study of mifepristone, which is the abortion pill. Now, the FDA's actions are being called by abortion rights advocates as the biggest threat to abortion access in the US right now, because mifepristone is used in around 2/3 of all US abortions. So while a safety study doesn't sound alarming on its surface, in this context, it's really being seen as laying the groundwork for restricting how that drug is distributed and used in the US, and kind of aligns with the administration's anti-abortion agenda. And finally, and speaking as a scientist who writes about Trump and goes to conferences, I find this really dark. Distinguished scientists at the annual conference of the American Diabetes Association were removed by police after they handed out copies of an editorial they'd had published criticizing the Trump administration's changes to US biomedical research. The last kind of area I want to cover this week is on attacks on press freedom. Firstly, the Pentagon has barred journalists from entering its press office, declaring the space a sensitive compartmented information facility. Basically, they've made it classified. So reporters now can no longer walk into the room where they have always been able to ask questions of Pentagon officials. So this is a kind of very deliberate restriction on press access to the military. The new editor-in-chief of CBS News is Bari Weiss. She's considered a pretty loyal Trump ally. And then last week, longtime CBS 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley, who was fired after clashing with the new management, he issued a public statement where he's accused CBS executives of instructing him to inject falsehood and bias into his reporting. And that follows CBS also firing its executive producer, executive editor, and 2 correspondents last week, all without explanation. So that is kind of exactly what media capture by loyalists would look like. Trump also attacked CNN journalist Caitlin Collins this week during a press briefing, where he accused her of having hatred in her eyes and called CNN crooked as hell and a very corrupt organization. Trump ally David Ellison, who's son of Trump's friend and major donor Larry Ellison, is currently in the process of buying Warner Brothers, which includes CNN, through Ellison's company Paramount. And then finally, Trump walked out of an interview with NBC's Meet the Press last week after host Kristen Welker repeatedly asked Trump to provide evidence for his claim that the 2020 election was rigged. Trump didn't provide any evidence, he just called her and the network crooked and walked out of the interview. And finally, on the 6th of June, which was the 82nd anniversary of D-Day, when Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy in one of the most significant military operations in history, Trump marked the occasion on social media with an AI-generated video of himself riding a lion and a photo portraying the Obama Presidential Library as a dustbin. So, all these actions and more are available at trumpactiontracker.info. See you in a week or two.